may I say it's also a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Shrewsbury, and it might surprise him and indeed as other members to say that I very much agree with a lot of the remarks that he made today, especially on the points that farmers in Shropshire, as well as in my constituency of Ceredigion, have long felt as though the importance of the contribution that they make to the nation's well-being, indeed the importance of food security, has not always been appreciated by governments. And I should also like to associate myself with the comments he made regarding the strategic importance of some of these fertiliser plants. I very much believe that he has proposed this afternoon a very good idea about greater state intervention when it comes to these strategically important sites, and I'd like to touch a little bit upon that in a moment. But I'd also like to congratulate the Honourable Member for Rutland and Melton on securing this very important debate, and I thought that she set out very eloquently the grave backdrop against which we have this debate today, and the many challenges that our farmers are currently facing. Indeed, I thought it was quite sobering to reflect on the fact that so many farmers, faced with the rising input costs and the challenges to the cost of living, are considering leaving the industry. I believe the Honourable Member in her opening remarks referred to some 11.9% of dairy farmers are contemplating leaving the industry. And I know anecdotally a number of livestock farmers in Ceredigion are also considering whether or not they have a future in the industry. It's little wonder when we think about agflation or agricultural inflation, which, as we've already heard this afternoon, stands at some 28.4% if we consider the agricultural price index. And then some independent consultants named Andersons have suggested that the most latest estimates has agricultural inflation standing at over 25%. I know, having spoken to some farmers in Wales quite recently, that many people will refer to the fact that they're having better prices now at the market, and that, of course, is true. But what we don't always hear about, of course, is the rising cost of production. They very much need these higher prices because although the prices have risen, they very much, in terms of the profit margin, are seeing very little difference at all. And that, again, is fueling a great, I fear, departure from the industry, which we can ill afford when we consider the many concerns that have rightfully been raised in recent months about our food security. I think the war in Ukraine has perhaps brought it into very sharp relief that rather than in any way reducing our productive agricultural capacity, the challenge we have before us actually is to increase our agricultural productive capacity. I think the Honourable Member for North Devon touched on a very important point. She made very important points. But one of the points that struck a chord with me was this need perhaps for more coordinated land use planning to overcome some of the many challenges that we're facing, competing challenges on our land use. That is something that I think we need to return to in earnest, Mr Hollowborn, because we can't really waste much time on the matter. Can I just very briefly touch on, we've heard of the rising fuel prices, and I very much think that there is room for us to explore expanding rural fuel duty relief scheme, but I appreciate that is not underneath the remit of the Minister here this afternoon. But fertiliser has been mentioned a few times already this afternoon, and to add to what I mentioned with regards to the Honourable Member for Shrewsbury's remarks, I know of farmers who just this last year have seen the orders for fertiliser increase significantly. They were quoted prices around £200 per tonne last year. By now, it's not uncommon to have prices upwards of £700 per tonne plus VAT. The inability to plan in such volatility is a real challenge for our farmers, let alone the pressures that has on their margins and their ability to eke out a living. It is often mentioned that farmers find it very difficult to eke out a living, even the best of times. But this added volatility and the price hikes that they're having to navigate is making it almost an impossible task. I should also like to mention, of course, that in Wales the average farm holding is some 48 hectares. And anybody who cares to look at some of the farm business incomes in Wales will know that most farms in Wales don't have that much discretionary income to take and to absorb these additional prices. So I do think that it is time for us to look at interventions to support farmers with these rising input prices, and particularly the cost of fertiliser. The Honourable Member for Rutland and Melton mentioned the need for the government to establish a gas fertiliser index price to help improve transparency in what is a very opaque market. Now, that might not necessarily help to bring down the prices, but it will at least offer a bit of a helping hand in terms of the ability to plan and to manage a little bit of this volatility. But with regard to how do we actually help with the costs of fertilisers, in addition to the points made by the Honourable Member for Shrewsbury and indeed the Honourable Member for Ellesmere Port in terms of the strategic importance of these fertiliser plants, is it perhaps also a time for us to look at whether or not some of these inputs to agricultural production, we need to consider again, the VAT treatment of some of these inputs. I appreciate this is something for the Treasury, but perhaps the Farming Minister would be able to consider having a discussion with some of her colleagues in the Treasury. And finally, very in the short term, and before concluding, many members here representing rural constituencies will know that the price of heating homes is a real concern, especially for those on off-grid, off-mains gas grid properties. Farmhouses, of course, are one of those. Now, I know that in the Energy Bill Support Scheme of some £400 that is due to come in the autumn, that there still remains a question as to whether or not farmhouses will be eligible, primarily due to the fact that they tend to have commercial electricity contracts as opposed to domestic electricity contracts. Again, I know that the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy are looking at options to ensure that farms do not lose out on the scheme, but I would like, just in closing, to ask the Minister to really impress upon them the importance that we find a way to include farmhouses in this scheme, because although it might not make the world of difference, every little helps in the coming economic storm, and so I think it's very important that we ensure that farmers do not lose out. Thank you.